I always have to wonder what goes into issues that end up like this. Comic book production can be kind of tumultuous, despite issues generally being completed several months in advance. So, when it's an issue of a comic that generally focuses on an ongoing story, sometimes with a backup story in the back of the issue, it's strange to see an issue that basically splits its screen time into several different smaller stories, almost like the writers were having difficulty thinking up longer stories to help pad out the arc, which is generally a sign that arc is probably overstaying its welcome and should be wrapping up soon. This issue's cover is a pretty big departure from the last issue's dark and confused look, with this one being a more traditional action scene, with Sonic, Tails, and the Down Under freedom fighters rafting down a river while being attacked by what looks like a bunch of platypus soldiers. I like it, it's got a lot of good perspective and expression work. Also, it's got some actual color, who would have thought that? We open on Sonic, Tails, Barbie, and Walt, surrounded by an angry group of platypuses, with Guru, Emu, and Stu the Wombat hanging in wooden cages above them. Jumping right into it, huh? No establishment or anything, we're just going for it. Okay, I suppose there's nothing wrong with starting a story in medias res here. Sonic and company managed to take out the entirety of the small army in a few panels, showing off some rather dynamic action posing before Sonic cuts down Guru and Stu. Before everyone can get their bearings and continue introducing themselves to Sonic, this is technically his first time meeting them after all, Walt says that it's time for them to go over what they know and catch everyone, i.e. the audience, up to speed. Thus begins an extended flashback as to what the Down Under freedom fighters have been up to since Bunny and Antoine helped them escape captivity back during the Endgame. After they started cleaning up the place, one of their number, Bill the Platypus, suddenly went rogue and ran off, and returned with an army of angry platypuses that basically drove off the reconstruction effort. Bill even fakes being willing to negotiate in order to lure Guru and Stu into an ambush, capturing them, which just happened to coincide with Sonic and Tails landing the tornado here, where they agree to help out, which brings us back to the present. Now that we're back on the same page, the story continues, with Walt and Sonic, of course, starting to butt heads over their leadership positions. A bit forced, honestly, especially since, these two just met and they're already at each other's throats, despite being first introduced to one another like a page ago, and seeming to be on relatively good terms at that point. Barbie is quick to break them up and point out that there's something brewing under the water, and then they immediately get attacked by a small group of platypuses riding on frickin' alligators, or is it crocodiles? Sonic manages to clear the way by essentially spin-dashing through the water, making waves that pushes the platypuses away, allowing Tails to propel them through the swamp unharmed. Apparently, none of the assailants want to pursue them because next thing we see, Sonic and friends wind up finding Bill's secret hideout, which isn't so secret considering they knew exactly where to go, and it's right there out in the open, albeit on the water. When they land, they immediately confront Bill, who's not looking so good, talking to himself and looking exhausted. In fact, they don't even have to fight him, he just sort of passes out from exhaustion while the others investigate some sort of mechanical sound coming from under the floorboards. Rather than finding the telltale heart under there, they instead find the remains of Crocbot, wired up to some sort of network that's keeping him active under there. And completely unprompted, we get a very long, drawn-out monologue where he lays out exactly what he was doing there. Basically, all on the same panel. It turns out, coincidence of coincidences, he placed some sort of neural override chip behind Bill's ear back when he was being held in the prison camp during Endgame. And when he found Crocbot's remains during cleanup, that somehow triggered the programming chip, which caused him to go rogue and hook Crocbot back up. After that, Crocbot was going to use the platypuses to drive away everyone else, salvage the remains of the destroyed combots, rebuild them, and get himself a new body. He also mentions something about creatures called bunyips arriving, but before he can elaborate on what he means, Sonic just unplugs him despite Walt's insistence that that's his call to make. Sonic, surprisingly, decides to invoke the authority given to him by the king, saying that he has authority to disconnect and confiscate hostile mechanical devices, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure Down Under is well outside of the kingdom's borders. Then again, Barbie just says they'll defer to the king in this manner, and is pretty eager to get Crocbot away from them, though it's still a weird scene. Sonic and Tails head out on the tornado, Crocbot's body in tow as everyone else wishes them well, and Barbie creepily blows a kiss to Tails. Yeah, I've sort of been ignoring it this whole issue, but Barbie's been flirting with Tails this entire story, and it's more than a little off-putting. I mean, she's a mid to late teen, and he's a 4 to 8-year-old boy. Okay, if Tails has a crush on someone, that's one thing, that's one-sided, that's just something that can happen with kids, but seeing her actively flirting with him sends a lot of weird vibes, and makes me wonder if the writer of this piece was aware of the age difference. Oh wait, it was written by Gallagher, so he was most likely aware of the characters' canonical ages, I'm pretty sure, given the time he spent on the series. Anyway, Stu muses on what Crocbot was saying before Sonic unplugged him, with Barbie reminding everyone standing there, mostly for the benefit of the audience, that a bunyip is a monster found in Australian Aboriginal mythology, and as Sonic and Tails fly off, Sonic pointing out how into Tails Barbie was during the issue, ick, we get a little caption box essentially saying that if we like the idea of this whole bunyip plot hook, we can let Archie Comics know about it, and maybe it'll show up in a special or a mini-series down the line. To my knowledge, this is never followed up on at all. This story is a thing. It exists, but apart from getting to see the Down Under freedom fighters again, and yes, I do know that they have fans, this story feels like plain old filler. It does not progress Sonic and Tails' journey at all, and while neither did the last issue, the main reason for them traveling around the world was at least paid a bit of lip service. Here though, this is just a side quest, a very basic distraction that probably won't be referenced again in the future. There's barely any character here as well, and it's not like there was much for the Down Under characters to go off of before, but here, it feels like there's even less, as even their one-note personalities are pretty much gone. Most of their gimmicks aren't even acknowledged, like Guru's pacifism for example. Hell, he straight up whacks a guy in the face at one point. Stu is just Stu. Bill spends the entire story under mind control, Walt argues with Sonic and that's about it, and Barbie is just the girl who flirts with a very young child. Oh, and because of its short length, there's a very unhealthy amount of exposition that's thrown in order to make everything here make sense, sandwiching the story at the beginning and end, telling us what happened at the start of the story, which most of the characters would already be aware of, as shown by the fact that pretty much everyone takes turns talking here, and then at the end you have Crocbot literally telling the freedom fighters everything he wanted to do with his plan with absolutely no prompting. They barely have time to register that it's him talking to them before he starts monologuing and then gets shut off. On the art side of things, it's Harvo Mercaducasio handling pencils and inking duties, and while I don't think the art is the worst, he is pretty inconsistent in this story. No one seems capable of staying on model from one panel to the other, even when they aren't really doing anything. I mean, going off model is fine if there's a purpose for it, but here it really just feels like he wasn't really confident in keeping the characters looking the same from panel to panel. In some points, the characters are rail thin, almost like stick figures with how massive their heads are, while at other points, they have a more filled out body type to the point of looking pudgy. I will say that the action posing is pretty good, particularly in the middle, and the group shots tend to look pretty nice too, but I'm not a big fan of how everyone looks throughout the story. I don't really have that issue when I'm looking at where we're jumping for our second story of the issue, Total Turbulence, with pencils courtesy of Stephen Butler. This guy's going to hang around for a while doing art, and it isn't that bad. I don't think he's the best on the book right now, but he does a very good job, or at least he makes a good first impression with this story of his. In particular, his rendering of this Ixis Naugus in cloud form in this story is pretty dang cool looking. Unfortunately though, I don't have a lot to say about this story because it's even more of an in-between story than the last one was. Also, note that Crocbot is no longer on the tornado, so yeah, I guess we're already forgetting about that plot point. Sonic and Tails are heading straight toward the Nagas cloud while over the ocean, and as it turns out, that cloud actually is Nagas, or at least some sort of astral projection of him. Sonic and Tails apparently only perceive it as a particularly violent storm, and Nagas swats them away, but Sonic is able to pull up just in time and decimates the Nagas cloud on the upswing, with the duo triumphantly flying toward the parting clouds, wondering what new adventures await them, with the promise that the story would be continued in the next issue. It's a very quick, basic story without a whole lot of interesting stuff going on, but despite that, it seems to have a lot to say. Like, a lot. We're back with Carl Ballers in the driver's seat for this one, and while I will maintain my opinion that Ballers is a far better writer than Penders, one difficulty that the two writers share, at least at this point in time, is not letting the panels speak for themselves. Everything needs to be narrated and explained at length, to the point of boredom and monotony, and here it's no different. I mean, yeah, getting an explanation for Nagas' presence here is appreciated, but I kind of feel like you could cut a good chunk of the dialogue and it'd probably improve the flow a lot more. As it stands, the story seems a lot longer than it is, mostly because of all the talking, particularly from Nagas, who goes out of his way to explain how Sonic and Tails somehow managed to track him down, even though Sonic and Tails don't really realize that he's even there. I'll also say I actually really like how this story flows from panel to panel. Generally, when you have shorter stories like this, as exemplified by our opening this issue, you have to move fast to get out everything you want to. Here though, the story's simple premise means that the art flows really nicely from panel to panel. There's a natural through line that leads your eye from one image to the next, and it just feels good to read. Save for all the dialogue that kind of slows things down. So let's say we move on to the third and final story in the issue, and oh goody, it's everyone's favorite writer's pet, Jeffrey. On the plus side, the story does start with him almost getting blown up, so that does make me happy. He does survive, but his partner Fleming gives a nice little getting too old for this shit spiel, making it clear that he's gonna be retiring. Cut to Jeffrey meeting with King Max, where it's made clear that he thinks a new special service should be put together. After all, there are new threats and enemies that they'll have to deal with in the future. So saith the paranoid king. Jeffrey is left in charge of choosing who he wants to be on this team, as the king trusts his judgment as much as he trusted his father's, and his first stop is to the floating island, that place that the Echidna don't like other people to go, to recruit a chameleon, who apparently has worked with him before and also knows Espio, but isn't actually given a name here. If this character was actually named before in a past issue, then I really don't remember it at all. But anyway, St. John basically bullies him into joining his crew while they head to Down Under and grab Wombat Stu to join them next. Stu's been pretty bored since they defeated Crocbot. I guess the whole Platypus Rebellion thing didn't happen too long ago, if that's the case, and he basically joins sight unseen. Next, the three of them head in the direction of Mobotropolis, where he decides to go and invite Hershey along as well, since she's basically been relegated to a desk job at this point. He tells her to come to the armory and gives her an invite, which she accepts, but he doesn't actually make it clear what he wants her for, which, if I was in Hershey's shoes, would be a bit of a red flag. Now down to only needing one more recruit, we end on a panel of Jeffrey deciding to call it a night and work on the last recruitment in the morning, but as he opens the door, we see a pair of silhouettes on the other side, one of which is a very distinct bomb shape. This issue once again suffers from the same problem as the first story, because it goes a mile a minute with no room to slow down due to its short length, which only gives it more problems. Like the fact that I have no idea who the heck this first guy Jeffrey recruited is. His name isn't given at all during this story, which, if you're introducing a new character, or re-establishing a character that hasn't been seen for a while, that's kind of a good thing to do. Unless you have a really good narrative reason for it, a character's name should probably be one of the first things that we learn about them. Beyond that, I'm just sort of confused by these choices. Nameless Chameleon guy, he at least seems like the sort of operative you'd want on a stealth team, camouflage and all, so that does make sense. But Stu? He burrows, and we don't really have a solid idea of what he can do beyond that. And Hershey, well, I really don't know. Like, both Stu and Hershey were soldiers at some point, or at least guerrilla fighters, so it's safe to say they know how to defend themselves, but we're talking a secretive, special ops sort of deal here. That's the type of team with people who have specialized talents, who are really good at ducking under the radar, who can get inside someone's mind and make friends with them easily so that they're easier to betray. On the other hand, the fact that we haven't seen these characters do much of consequence, aside from the cathartic beatdown Hershey dropped on Drago back in Endgame, does mean that this is a chance for them to actually impress the audience. But the fact that we aren't really let into Jeffrey's reasoning for the choices he's made doesn't really help. Well, in Stu's case, we at least get a flimsy excuse of new blood, but it's not really that interesting. Again, maybe it'll get better given time as this storyline develops, but this isn't the best start to a brand new super secret special team. And this is also yet another plot thread to follow up on in this comic that is rapidly becoming a bit more complicated than it needs to be. It wouldn't be that bad if they were all quick stories or maybe a one-off or a mini-series here or there, but most of these tales are intertwining with one another, in some form or fashion. We have Sally's strained relationship with her father, Sonic and Tails' journey to find Nagas, Knuckles' whole thing on the floating island, which you could probably subdivide into like 2 to 4 separate plot threads at this point, and now Jeffrey forming his own team of super spies. I mean, I'm all for expanding a story and giving us multiple threads to keep things interesting, but this is asking a lot, especially for the target audience of this comic. There's nothing wrong with keeping the plot straightforward and mostly on a single track so long as it's a tale that is really well told. I mean, that's one of the things that the IDW series has been really good about. Every arc is its own self-contained story, but every arc either builds upon what has come before in a natural way, or drops hints and breadcrumbs here and there that help to set up for future plot points without forcing us to keep track of like 4 or 5 different things all happening at once. I'm just really hoping that we get to a point where the comic will start to pick a lane and stick with it for a while. But for now, it looks like we're still going to have the main Knuckles and Sonic stories, as well as some super spy weirdness happening in a side story featuring Jeffrey St. John. Let's see how all this progresses when we take a look at Sonic the Hedgehog, issue 62. See you next time, everyone.